welcome back to another episode with Fight Night Picks. As always, we're brought to you by SimBody. Vertiball is now SimBody. If you head on over to their website, simbody.com, you're going to get all the great products that you know and love, including the SimBody Vertiroller and the Vertiball that you have seen most likely here in studio. Look at that. Place it, lock it, attach it, Vertiball, all sorts of great stuff over there if you want to roll out those old tired muscles and you don't want to go with that old lacrosse ball. They're also coming out with that very new product that you can see right in front of you. And if I head on over to my cart, look at that. I've already got a Vertiball over there. Little bit of a deal right there. And if you hit the try for 60 days risk-free, use the promo code FNP, you're going to get 20% off your order with that code FNP at simbody.com. You're really helping out another local company here in New Brunswick, Canada. Can't wait for it. The new name, SimBody at simbody.com. And as we always say, let's get into it.
A last look at the big card. Be sure to head into the chat and have your say. Let's get into it and join in Fight Night Picks Kicks.
Oh boy, and just like that, we're live for UFC Fight Night, Lemos versus Andrade. And listen, for everybody out there in the chat, Alex Gagnon, Kurt Tyre, we got Joe, we got Kicks Good, Lucas23 saying, let's get into it, yo. And Tyler saying, hi guys, and also Prince Vegeta Son saying, smash that like button.
How we doing, everyone?
How's it going? I mean, listen, this wasn't coordinated that we'd be repping the 6, but Matt's got some high hopes. I mean, Miggy Cabrera, 3,000 hit today. I mean, slow golf clap for him. But Scotty B getting that Rookie of the Year. And listen, I was just feeling the Jays. They got a big game against the Stros coming up later on today.
And we can all join together in hating against the Astros. So that's a good message for everyone.
Those poor folks. But when it does come to just even Saturday being today, I mean, you've got a big-time boxing event coming up. I mean, Dillian White taking on Tyson Fury. Everybody's excited about that one. You got Bellator coming up. Title on the line at 145, the rematch. Chris Cyborg taking on Arlene Blenko. I mean, listen, I'm excited to see a little bit of that taco meat. Ralphie on Stotts. I absolutely love watching that guy perform. Taking on One Archuleta. You had the PFL earlier on this week. I mean, listen, I'll pull out a prop. I mean, Cassius Clay Collard getting it done against Jeremy Stevens. That was a wild fight. And then also buried into this week, I mean, we got to talk about it, Lemos versus Andrade. Matt, it's a card. And did you see the fan vote in our community tab?
No.
There were like 1,300 votes, and the large majority, about 70%, voted a D on this card.
So maybe I'm in the minority, but I'm really excited for the main event. I can't speak to the whole depth of the card because, hey, these fight nights lately have not been the deepest yet. They really did stack that UFC London card, which sort of put my hopes up for all the other, not prelim, but sort of the fight nights throughout the year. They haven't all been all that great all the way through, but I really do think Lemos versus Andrade is one of those classic litmus test fights where we go, okay, we know Jessica Andrade, she's been 50-50 with any champion at 115 or 125 pounds. Lemos, we think, can get into that category. I think Andrade is the perfect test to see if Lemos finally is elite or not. We know about her knockout ability, how good her striking is, but Andrade's that type of fighter who's going to test you in every single area of MMA, and that's why I really do think this weekend's main event is going to be great.
Matt, listen, Otis saying, go sit around campfires telling stories of Mike Jackson. I mean, we got little MJ, we get the record back there, and Clay saying Stott's going to roll. I think Stott's going to win the whole damn thing. Now that Sergio Pettis is kind of sidelined, and listen, Horiguchi's fighting tonight. You know I'm going to get excited about that. You can tell which card I'm going to be watching tonight, basically. But, listen, we'll throw it on over to our Fight of the Night screen, and you kind of touched on it, but when we look at this fight, Lando Vannata, second fight at featherweight, looked like a shell of Lando Vannata on the scales.
Bury the lead a little bit.
He looked terrible, and Charles Jourdain looking like himself, but so again, cat out of the bag, breaking the fourth wall. This is a graphic from early in the week, but Charles Jourdain came in at 144.5. We have that updated once we get to the real QMK breakdown, but in this one, Vannata's wrestling, Jourdain striking. That's what gets us excited about this. Oh, by the way, when Lando Vannata strikes, with the exception of like his last 3 or 4 fights, he's usually pretty wild, so that's what makes it fun.
And that is the wild thing about Lando Vannata. He used to fight like Charles Jourdain fights right now, but after you have a lot of those crazy fights, you normally do end up fighting in a safer type of way as you progress through your career. And I do think we're starting to see that out of Vannata, and I guess we have been seeing that transformation out of him. Charles Jourdain is the type of fighter, though, who, if you still have any of that brawler left inside of you, he's gonna take that out. So I do think this is gonna be a phenomenal fight. I've seen a lot of people in the chat already say, like, this is my main event, so I really do think it's going to pay off and be the best fight of the night.
Oh, it should be an amazing one. And Otis saying, do you guys recall Stotts versus Rob? Yeah, spinning back fist lands sometimes. Quack the Duck with the super chat with the hype.
Quack.
And listen, you want to talk about hype? I watched the fan-controlled football league today, so that was hype.
Wow.
It was different. I enjoyed
There's
it.
playoff basketball on, Craig.
Listen, I watched Tottenham lose to Brentford, and then I already had DAZN on. They drew. And then I thought, you know what? Let's just keep this train rolling on DAZN. Fan-controlled football. It's different. But Lemos, Andrade, you already touched on this one. But two women with absolute knockout power at 115. We never really like to cherry pick off of the main event, but the card's a little weak, and this fight should deliver.
And exactly, Jessica Andrade is a walking fight of the night. She's never had a fight where you're like, wow, that was really boring. Like, the Shevchenko fight was probably the worst one to watch, and that was still a pretty good fight. Not for Andrade, of course, but just watching it as a casual observer, it was still a really fun fight. And again, like I said right before, Lemos, we know what she can be. This is the fight for her to prove it to us, so I think this could be a great strawweight main event.
Should be a lot of fun, Matt, and so far you got 164 tuned in right now, and that number is going to go up incrementally. I'm sure we're going to have to recap because, well, that's what we do with question mark kicks right at the end. If you missed anything, I have zip going on for QMK parlay this week. Why? Because I had over 1.5 rounds. Alatang Hae Lee taking on Kevin Kroom, and what happened? He knocked him out in under a minute. So listen, now we're here. We're going to enjoy the card, and we're going to start off with, Matt, the first fight on this one, Dean Barry, Mike Jackson. Now, Dave Baker is always in the chat throughout the week on this YouTube channel. You can catch him there. Some people give him flack. Don't give him flack.
Don't.
Respected member of this community. And he said, basically, and I paraphrase, you guys spent more time on this fight than any other fight on the card.
And we shouldn't have, let's be honest.
No, we should have. I love this fight. It's so much fun. Now, there was an article out there by Pete Carroll, and he talked about the fact that it's a head scratcher for not only North American fans, but Irish fans as to how Dean Barry made it into the UFC. So he talked to Brian Butler, who is Dean Barry's manager, and Brian Butler said, listen, they wanted somebody that could kind of match up skill for skill well with Mike Jackson, but be on his level to the fact where the commission would sign off on the fight. And so they did. So Dean Barry, WAKO kickboxing credentials, point fighting is his background, but when you look at it in his overall fights and the 4-1 that we've seen, he hasn't been point fighting. He's been knocking guys out. Now, subpar level competition, albeit, but when you do look at this fight, I mean, over in the comments section, we got Professor Chris saying Raptors not going quietly for my Sixers today.
Good. I just don't want them to get swept.
Sean MMA is saying I'm Irish and supporting Jackson, and Kicks Good saying this is going to be ugly. Matt, Mike Jackson hasn't competed in about 4 years. 30-26 across the board when he beat Chick Magnet Punk. Overturned to a no contest 3 years later because of the green bud. So when it comes to this fight, Matt, we know with Mike Jackson, pro boxing experience, he's a 2009 Houston Golden Gloves champ. He's 0-1 in the no contest in pro MMA. He's got a Muay Thai background. He takes lovely photographs and is a respected member of the MMA media world.
Prince Vegeta's son put Mike Jackson's a great guy. He is. Like, anything I've ever seen him do, I'm a big fan of it. I like his pictures. I like his interviews. I like all of, like, the MMA media stuff that Mike Jackson does. My problem is, I don't even think Dean Barry on his best day is going to have 5 fights in the UFC. But I still think Dean Barry is probably going to beat Mike Jackson this weekend. It would be like if we're getting ready for an NBA game and the kids are on the court like shooting before the game starts. We're saying, hey, they're actually going to be on the roster in like 30 minutes, by the way. Like, put on a jersey and get ready. For me, I just don't think Mike Jackson or Dean Barry are at this level. And I know, oh, well, they're at the level, aren't they? No, not really. This is like the minor leagueification of Major League Baseball right now. They're bringing guys up who can fill a spot. And that's pretty much what both these guys are right now. I do think Dean Barry is the more well-rounded fighter, though, out of these two. And that's why I do end up having to pick him. But I am glad that you gave sort of the backstory to this fight and even how Dean Barry got here. Because you look at how Mike Jackson's UFC career has gone, just combat sports career has gone. It's been very strange to get to this point, and for Dean Barry, it's not like he's a guy who's won a lot of fights in the regional scene, fought on Contender Series, and then came over.
So, did a lot of deep dive, did like a 12-minute video on this fight. The one thing that I forgot, and I read about it in the Pete Carroll interview, and then I saw it, I guess I did see it in the comments section. You remember what Dana White said about Mike Jackson after that fight in the press conference?
He said it was one of the worst fights he's ever seen, and didn't say a single thing about Mike Jackson positively. He buried him.
No, and they say why. Why? Tell him that it's human nature. Great tune. You look at the odds for this one, and I mean, for Jackson, he is very much a boxer when he fights. We got to talk about the fight. Doesn't throw a lot of kicks, holds his head pretty darn high, but Dean Barry opened a minus 700 favorite. He's a minus 1110, and Mike Jackson opened a plus what? 525. He's plus 692. So it is a little wild right there. Big sus 420 saying it's a regional fight. That much is true. The fans at Fight Night Picks, 81% going with Dean Barry at Fight Night Picks on Instagram in the story. 19% Jackson. I have Dean Barry here. Much more active fighter when he's in the stand-up. Neither one of these guys have much of a ground game. If anybody was going to take anybody down, I would anticipate Mike Jackson to do it. But with Dean Barry, like when he's on his back, it's to pop right back up to his feet. And he is pretty good on the first move to get back up.
This is my problem, though. You're not doing Dean Barry any favors for his MMA career right now. Because if you beat Mike Jackson, you want to know the cool thing? You're still in the UFC. And there's not another guy in the UFC roster I think Dean Barry could go out there, and I would confidently say he could beat right now. Now, I'm sure there's somebody I'm just not thinking of right now, but you have to get the idea. Like, Dean Barry's going to be one of these fighters who is only fighting entry-level UFC caliber fighters for a while now.
Austin Laxton hit it on the head. You got Martin Sano and Michael Gilmore to round out that four-man tournament at 170, so it's not the highest level of fight, but again, both of us going with Dean Barry here. No plays on this card whatsoever. This is a recap if we've ever had one. Marcin Prachnio taking on Philipe Lins. Now, Matt, that picture, not au courant, because Philipe Lins looking pretty damn good yesterday.
I thought he did too.
I thought he looked great. So, coming in, making the weight, Marcin Prachnio looked pretty damn good too for himself. Now, for Philipe Lins, what did he do well in that old PFL season where he knocked 4 guys dead, finished all 4 fights, became a millionaire?
He was very steady, and he was a smart kind of aggressive, because right now, Philipe Lins is very odd. He's not getting blown out of all of his fights. He's just not really doing that much in any of them, which is very odd, because he was someone who, he had a really nice leg kick, does have good boxing. You know, if it does go to the ground, especially against a guy like Prachnio, he should be able to have success. It's just, with Prachnio, I don't really know where to gauge him, if we're being honest. He had one of the worst starts to a UFC career we have ever seen. Like, ever.
Walked across the cage, hands down, knocked out cold by Sam Allen.
He was one of these fighters who, okay, he was on a losing streak. You're like, wow, he's going to get another one. But he has been able to sort of, I guess, recapture some of the glory that he found outside the UFC. I still think Prachnio is the much better striker in this fight, though. And Philipe Lins did look good enough on the scale for me to at least reconsider my pick, because that was a big talking point about this whole prediction. It was, hey, Lins did look good at 205. It's been a little while since he cut the weight. He's had basically a whole heavyweight career in between these two. How will he look? And I know we're going to talk about Romanov later on, another guy who showed up on the scale looking like a completely new man, but I still am going to stick with the Prachnio pick. I do think that on the outside, he's at least going to be able to get enough damage off on Lins, because Lins, although physically does look a lot different, I don't know if mentally he's going to be able to go back into that move forward kind of a style. So I do still like Prachnio, but this is not a confident pick either, mainly because of how poor Prachnio's UFC career got started.
Yeah, so Clay is saying started out on Lins, ended up on Prachnio. Don't think we're going to get PFL Lins in this one. He definitely is the older man. He's moving back down to a more natural weight class, or at least where he spent the bulk of his career at 205, which might sound silly because he won heavyweight in the PFL. Remember how good Ali Asayev was when he was in the PFL in the second season? Then he won it, and then he hasn't fought since. So I know he's got a fight booked, and I'm excited about that just to see him back, but he is very much a wrestler. The odds for this one, Marcin Prachnio slight favorite at a minus 122, open to minus 150. Lins open plus 130. He is at a plus 100, so odds closing in on par. Otis saying, yeah, the old Lins. I don't think, no, he didn't have any USADA issues. He was just off for a really long time. Injuries, he missed an entire season of the PFL in 2019, and then he's just had a steady litany of injuries and fights that have been moved around. He had the 3 fights against Ben Rothwell that were supposed to happen. They didn't. At Fight Night Picks votes for this one, 66% on Prachnio. I have Prachnio based on the movement and the volume. Lins definitely a live guy to get the knockout. I saw Kicks Good said that in the first round, saying I think Lins bounces back here. So
if he ever does, this is the fight he's going to do it.
Oh, 100%. Marcin Prachnio, an impressive 2-fight win streak coming into this one. Matt, Preston Parsons, Evan Elder. So I notice when Clint, friend of the show, Clint McLean, tweets about fights, and I see his little, thing that he posts there, he's got quite a bit going on Lins. He's got like a small amount on Evan Elder to win by submission. If Evan Elder wins this fight by submission, I will put out a video on my Twitter publicly, praising Clint, because Preston Parsons, all 9 of his wins by submission. He's the natural welterweight, taking on a lightweight, moving up in weight. Now, Evan Elder looked great. Evan Elder looked great yesterday on the scales. He looked really good in the face-off. they matched up really well. I'm eager to see what Preston Parsons looks like today now that he's rehydrated. But for Elder, very much a striker and not all that adept on the ground from the footage that I saw. And when he shoots from very long distances to engage in his wrestling. And he has poor top control. Like, once he gets top pressure, sometimes he'll just stand back up and let the fight resume. Now, he is a kickboxer. That much is true. We talked about this fight quite in depth as like a late notice throw-in type of fight because obviously Preston Parsons was due Louis Kosei and not Evan Elder. FAC champ. And he's booked in a fight a month from now. Now, obviously, that one falls out. Sanford MMA guy, too, as well. And for Preston Parsons, Elevate MMA, it's the gym that he owns. He had Joaquin Buckley in there to train with and get ready for. Joaquin Buckley, friend of the friends, but not really. Darren Till and Hamzat Chimaev. Over there in the comment section, Matt, just want to get to it. Otis saying, Evan Elder's such a superhero name. Not much is true. And Kicks Good saying I have Parsons by submission. So
they both follow that like Stan Lee thing of we're going to use the same initial for first name, last name. Good call on that.
And Pacwin21 saying when is the Dean Barry fight? And Undercover MVP saying Barry by knockout. And Prince Vegeta's son saying who's more aggressive, Matt? This fight, another one where it's like this is the main event of like an FAC show. Or like a third fight in on an LFA show, and it's on a UFC card.
You bring up a lot of negatives about Evan Elder, but we also got to do the same thing for Preston Parsons. I don't think he's a guy who's going to be around the UFC for 7, 8, 9 fights. He is very basic with his own game, and he is very submission heavy. But again, he's someone who you don't look at and think, wow, they can drop you on the feet and then get it done with a submission after they hurt you. Like, Preston Parsons really is that kind of a wrestler, trying to get to your back, trying to submit you. He does have more variety to his submissions than just a rear naked choke. But again, he does have some massive holes in his stand-up, and that's why this fight is so hard to predict. Like, you have one guy in Evan Elder who hasn't looked great in a lot of the footage that I've watched of him up until this point. And let's be honest, neither guy has the best level of competition on their resume up until this point. So this will be largely a learning experience for both guys, or at least I believe so. I really do think that if we can at least get 15 minutes out of these guys, I think that would just be good for everybody. So we know where they sit in the divisions. Because for Parsons, got destroyed by D-Rod his last time out. No big deal. Most unranked fighters on short notice would. I'm not making that a massive mark against him. But that's the problem. That is what most UFC fans have of you in their minds. You really have to go out there, do something impressive to sort of make up for that really bad loss. And I do think that Parsons' grappling will be enough of an X factor for him to beat someone like Evan Elder.
It'll be interesting, too, because I've seen Evan Elder. I had it in my notes when he took on Paris Padilla, the one where he drops his mouth guard, puts it back in his mouth, and then throws a head kick and knocks him out.
He was 4 weight classes bigger than him.
If you look at that cage, it's got to be an 18-foot cage. Like, I've seen an 18-foot cage in person, and they're small as it gets, and that looked like it. So, you got a guy in Elder, some experience there. When you look at it for Parsons, that fight against D-Rod, a little bit of a weird one, but again, overall, Elder has yet to suffer a loss as a pro. He has one loss as an amateur against Luis Pena. Be interesting to see what we get here. We have a look at Fight Night picks for the votes. 57% going with Preston Parsons, so therefore you have 43% on Elder. The odds in this fight, Parsons slight favorite, opened at par. He's minus 142. If you look at it for Elder, plus 123. So if you have, a staunch stance on this one, you let us know. Matt, 250 tuning in. Did not expect giant numbers on this Saturday because this card is overshadowed by much. But what you can do is toss a like. Those are free. You can hit up the super chat.
And we never talked about boxing, but right before we got off on our last episode, I remember saying, hey guys, Earl Spence is fighting Ugas tonight. You should check it out. It was an amazing fight. And I'm not ever here to advocate for boxing over MMA, because here's the thing. MMA, boxing. But I think Tyson Fury versus Dillian Whyte is definitely a fight that you guys should check out. If you're even a little bit curious in boxing, it's at Wembley Stadium, 90,000 people. That is the type of fight that you should watch if you've ever even thought about trying to get into boxing.
Oh, it's a big one. Those heavyweight fights, those guys can bang, Matt. You know who can bang? Aoriqileng making the move back up to bantamweight. His 2 fights in the UFC at 125, this one at 135. Now, you see the stats in front of you. I want to make sure they're correct because they're very small in front of me, but one guy is 5'7", one guy is 5'9". Aoriqileng build is 5'7", Cameron Else as 5'9". When they faced off, Aoriqileng looked taller. So what do we know? I don't, but both guys fitting in quite well at 135. Now, Cameron Else, you saw it in some of those interviews that he had with All-Star MMA, with Ryan Jarrell, with Cage Side Press, talking about the fact, like, he is a big guy for 135. He's in here to knock guys out. He's a guy that spent time at BMF Ranch and Jackson Wink and now has since moved over to Syndicate, training with Louis Cosi, training with some of those bigger guys. I mean, Jourdain Parsons, another one of those guys, picked up a win last weekend, somewhat controversially against Trey Ogden. But in a fight like this, Matt, Kick's good saying else round one then fades. Yeah, I mean, it really is tough. Like, Aoriqileng's always there, has pretty good output, gets hit all friggin' day. Gets hit more than he hits, which is something that's kind of scary. Gotten dropped in the second round twice against a really tough out Jeff Molina, a guy who comments fights sometimes.
Really good at it, too.
Yeah.
Shout out to Jeff Molina, actually. Like, he should do more things where he has a microphone in front of his face, because he does speak very well for the division that he's in. He could be, maybe not like the most famous guy in the flyweight division. It's just, in a division where you are kind of looking for stars, I really do think Jeff Molina is one of those guys who, he isn't there yet, but if he can string together 3 or 4 more wins in a row, we're going to be seeing a lot of him in the MMA world.
Oh, 100%. Austin Laxon saying I really like Jeff Molina, 100%. But when it comes to this one, we put a video out at the start of the week because UFC did us dirty, and in a press release, and on Topology, and on all the sites, they said it was a flyweight, and I said if it's a bantamweight, Cameron Else wins, but at flyweight, I've got Aoriqileng. Then we made the other video, and I took Cameron Else, Matt, my head, I'm discombobulated. I don't know what to think. We have a fight between a finisher who, in all 10 of his wins, they're by first-round finish, and for Aoriqileng, had a ton of finishes outside of the UFC. Now he's in the UFC, and he's 0-2, so what are we saying here?
At least Aoriqileng has insane output when he is fighting, and that's something that you can always rely on, because output does have a direct tie to cardio, and if you don't have good cardio, I don't really care about how good your skills are. How many MMA fights do we watch every single week where it's one guy looks really good in the first round, can't keep that kind of sustained output, gets tired, and then all the great striking and all that great work they did in the first round is kind of negated in the second and third. It's a very famous quote, fatigue makes cowards out of men.
But have you ever seen that out of Cameron Else?
No, but I don't think he has the output that Aoriqileng does, and that's really my big point about this fight. As long as he doesn't hit him with that one big shot, I really do think Aoriqileng, it's his fight to lose, because both guys are so offensively oriented that I do think that if Aoriqileng is able to get in the pocket, if I'm always throwing at you, your hands won't be focused on throwing back at me, they're going to be focused on defending yourself. And I do think that just because Aoriqileng, in my mind, would be the one moving forward, I do think he'll have more success, because I do think that'll play into his own offensive takedowns, and I'm glad you brought up the size disparity, or at least the non-difference between them, because Aoriqileng physically did look a lot closer to Cameron Else than I thought he would going into this weekend, so I stick with the Aoriqileng pick from flyweight to bantamweight. I'm going to stick with it today.
Yeah, it really is a weird one. When you have a look at the odds for this one, Aoriqileng, a minus 245 favorite. You got Cameron Else at a plus 194. If we have a look at Fight Night picks, for the votes, 74% of the fans going with Aoriqileng to 26% that are going with Cameron Else. And Cameron Else is in one of those categories where you did it on the regional scene, you did it for quite a long time, you have a win over Paddy Pimblett that nobody even talks about.
It was all over Twitter yesterday.
Okay, it was. And when you do look at it, he had a debut just like Preston Parsons had. They went, Preston Parsons, you want to come in on short notice? Here's D-Rod. They went, Cameron Else, you want to come in on short notice? Here's a really tough Kyler Phillips. And then we'll give you Aaron Phillips, another Phillips, but he couldn't make that fight because of visa issues. So when it comes to this fight, I'm still going to go with Cameron Else on this one. Finishing ability is definitely there. Aoriqileng, always in your face, definitely last 3 rounds, definitely can get knocked down. If he gets knocked down against Cameron Else, the trouble there is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. I think Cameron Else still is in very good shape. I like the fight. I'm actually really looking forward to this one at 135, but we're split on the pick. We'll see what happens in this one. Should be a good fight either way. Tyson Pedro coming in with shorter hair.
He does.
Looking like a man because he's 30. And he's taking on Ike Villanueva, a guy who's 18-13, 1-4 in the UFC. But you know what? If Ike loses this fight and goes, I want to go back to the regional scene. I want to kick it with the Fury FCs of the world. I want to win those belts back at 205 or at 265 or wherever he wants to do it. Sean Shelby or Mick Maynard might go, you know what, Ike? Red Rover, come back over, sign a new contract, double your pay, and fight somebody on short notice like Chase Sherman got, right?
They could, but this is my problem with Ike Villanueva. I think we are seeing a much lesser version of him now than we did earlier on in his career. And I don't even just mean in the UFC. If you watch Ike Villanueva throughout his career, he's always had the same style. He's not one of these guys who's added major new wrinkles to his style as he's progressed. He just can't take the shots like he used to. Like, you can get into those I ate a shot to give a shot brawls, but once your durability isn't at 100 anymore and it starts to get chipped away away at over and over and over again. You know what quote from the great Dwayne Casey I'm about to bring up? When you chip away at the rock, eventually it won't be there anymore. And I do feel like with Ike Villanueva, we are starting to see him on the other side of what these brawls are doing to him, or at least the MMA fighter in him. And listen, Tyson Pedro isn't a big puncher. He's not someone who can go in there just one-hit quitter, but he might look like that against Ike Villanueva. I really do think that Pedro can rock Villanueva bad enough to then get him down on the mat and submit him, because these guys' difference in their grappling is insane. Tyson Pedro, although defensively there are a few holes in his game with his own grappling, offensively you do not want to mess around with him on the mat. He's got really good sweeps from his back and just a really intelligent submission game too. So I just think that on the feet, could Ike Villanueva look good here or there in a couple moments? I think he could. I just think that as this fight progresses, Tyson Pedro, the much younger guy and the much better grappler.
So Laos Non saying haven't seen Pedro in forever. He was decent once upon a time. I mean, 7-3 the overall record. He's 1-3 in his last 4, but his last fight was so long ago against Shogun Rua. And one of the things that I wanted to mention, I want to make sure that I get it right now. Tyson Pedro, black belt in Japanese Jiu-Jitsu, black belt in BJJ, black belt in Kempo Karate. So great backgrounds to have, but again, in-fight adjustments can be one of his big-time problems. That was a flaw when he
Do you know Ike Villanueva for making massive adjustments in the middle of fights?
Listen, this is the reason why I'm bringing it up with Tyson Pedro. Because Tyson Pedro, right now, having been out for so long, is a minus 625 favorite. Ike Villanueva at a plus 448. What do we know about Ike Villanueva? Walks forward, boxes, doesn't throw kicks, doesn't check kicks, and that's pretty much it. So, a classic boxer in MMA, if we've ever seen one, for Tyson Pedro. Great background and everything, but he can struggle with the takedowns at times. Again, that fight that he had against a tricky old Swede in Ilir Latifi. If you look at it, when he took on OSP, great, dropped him, and then ended up in a straight arm lock. And realistically, that fight against Shogun, gets rocked, gets dropped, has the issue with the knees, and we haven't seen him since. Multiple ACL injuries, multiple meniscus injuries, and there was a question there as well about has he trained at City Kickboxing? He has. But I assume he's going to have Joe Lopez in his corner, who's in the corner of great fighter. One of the best fighters in Alexander Volkanovski his last time out. So, interesting fight. Also, I have Tyson Pedro in this one because it feels like one of those traveling Wilburys fights. Like, at the end of the line, the guy on the right's kind of at the end of the line in the UFC.
Not happy to be here, happy to be alive at the end of the line. Tyson Pedro, this is his fight to lose. Again, he was a ranked fighter, a hot prospect at one point, but he wasn't like to the Sean O'Malley level. And that's where I feel like people do need to sort of readjust their expectations. I feel like people are being sold that, hey, Tyson Pedro was like Sean O'Malley, then he got hurt and bad things happened. He was a good prospect, but no one was looking at Tyson Pedro as like a future title challenger. People were just excited that there was another good ranked fighter at 205 pounds, because there's not a lot of new ones showing up into the rankings all the time. Now, of course, we have guys like Jamal Hill. Recently, Johnny Walker's been able to get into the rankings since Tyson Pedro's been gone. Paul Craig, another guy who's sort of in that category.
Jimmy Crute's only going to grapple from now on.
Exactly. So Pedro is a good prospect, but I never really looked at him as being one of those great all-time prospects that injuries took away his prime. So I do think he'll be good enough to beat Ike Villanueva, but I've always looked at Tyson Pedro's ceiling as an 8-15 guy. I just feel like he might struggle to break in higher than that. But again, MMA's a weird sport. Jan Blachowicz went 2-4 to start his career and ended up becoming champion. So crazier things have happened.
That's it, and we'll see what happens in the return. Both of us going with Tyson Pedro there, Matt. Our next fight, Dwight Grant taking on Sergey Khandozhko. And Matt, I'm so surprised because Sergey Khandozhko is another one of those guys who's been out for a very long time. 53% of the fans at Fight Night Picks have Honda to win this fight, taking on the body snatcher, Dwight Grant. I mean, listen, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, main character from St. John, New Brunswick, Canada, Donald Sutherland. That's a lot of fun. But when it comes to this fight,
I just think of Space Jam when Vlade Divac is like, hey, we can't go play. It's like Invasion of Body Snatchers.
Yeah, and Vlade Divac and the old
Not
Sacramento Kings. Yikes. Terrible team. But when it comes to this one, Matt, Wesley Snipes is saying Dwight Grant over Candyman. You've got Kicks Good saying Sergey by decision, and Pulse Reloaded saying, does Dwight Grant comb his hair with a brick? He's got pretty cool hair. It's a weird one, though, and the reason being is because Dwight Grant hits like a Mack truck, but doesn't hit very often in his fights. And for Sergey, he's got that master sport, hand-to-hand combat, and karate in his back pocket. You have to get a lot of fights in to get those accreditations. And when it comes to this fight, Matt, it is a weird one because Sergey's been out for so long. And his debut was on short notice against Rostam Akman, who at the time was undefeated, a Cage Warriors guy, a bit of a head scratcher at the time too, body sweater of hair. And Sergey's able to get the decision win. And then his next time out, he takes on Rustam Khabibulov, who's a lightweight great that never really broke through, and then moves up to welterweight, beats Sergey handily by taking him down and wearing him out, and then Rustam goes, see you later. I'm never fighting again.
Chad Johnson, shout out to George Roop. No one talks about that guy ever, but he has one of the nicest knockouts of all time over the Korean Zombie. I highly recommend you go back and watch that.
Did he fight Dustin Poirier at one point?
George Roop?
Malone Hart hitting up the super chat saying, if you could be an expert in martial arts, i.e. boxing, wrestling, BJJ, which would you pick?
Like, if I had 10 out of 10 in any MMA skill?
BJJ.
Either that or boxing, one of those
Less
two.
trauma on my head. I'm going BJJ.
Boxing's super fun, though, so it would be great to have, like, Tyson Fury levels of boxing experience. Great question, though. That's a really fun one to think about. This is a weird fight, though, because for Dwight Grant, we all know what he's good at. He does have that crazy power, but when you look up stats, I feel like that's very unneeded when you look up Dwight Grant's stats. He throws one significant strike per minute, and it's basically always going to give him a chance to win if he does land it. You basically have 25 separate moments throughout a Dwight Grant fight where he either wins or he does nothing for the minutes in between. And it's a really, really hard style to break down because, again, he's either going to win by flash knockout and look amazing, or he's just going to get his ass beat for 15 minutes. And that's the thing. When you do rely on that weird kind of, I need distance, but I'm a good power puncher, but my fights tend to go late, it's just nothing Dwight Grant does has synergy together. It's all sort of, it's a good MMA game, don't get me wrong, but it's like if you're really good at shooting three-pointers and you're really good at finishing at the rim, but you can't dribble, you can't post up, like, there's other components that you do need to be really effective in MMA, and for Dwight Grant, I like the big left hand, but, like, you're not Conor McGregor, you know? So I really do think this fight against Khandozhko is going to be difficult for him, mainly from an output standpoint. And I know we can say that for pretty much any Dwight Grant fight, but it'll be really interesting to see how he deals with the forward pressure of Sergey, because it's either Grant's going to land that one big shot in the pocket, or I could see him being on the receiving end of a lot of combinations and leg kicks too, because that's the thing. If Grant had better kicks and he could keep guys away from him and constantly damage them, I think that'd be a really, really nice attack for him. But the fact that he doesn't have anything in that range does worry me.
Sergey's not a big pressure fighter either. He's kind of a volume guy, but when he's on the back foot, and he likes to counter strike, which could go against him in this fight. Both guys low output in the UFC. Against Sergey, 2 fights, but he spent the first one in control and the second one on his back.
So do you think more than likely we are going to see one of those fights where there's 2 guys looking in a mirror for a lot of it? It just comes down to whoever did slightly more per round?
And due to that, the guy that loses this fight's done. So, I do see that. And Dwight Grant, again, he's had some fights that have gone his way that probably shouldn't have. That Trinaldo fight, very, very close. The 9-9 last round. Probably should have ended up a draw. Somehow Dwight Grant able to pull it out. But when we look at the odds for this fight, just for the conversation's sake of it, Khandozhko slight favorite, -121. Dwight Grant, +100. So both of us in this one going with Khandozhko. But this is one of those fights that... why?
Khandozhko could look good for 24 and a half minutes and then get flatlined in the last 30 seconds, then we look like idiots.
Jairzinho on the left
Exactly.
side.
It's one of those fights. So if Dwight Grant wins, it's probably going to be spectacular and probably going to be all over Twitter, but I do think Sergey's the more consistent guy in this matchup.
Prince Vegeta-san saying, Grant may turn a corner. What corner?
Late
He's very
in his life.
old. Jourdain Wright taking on Marc-Andre Barriault. Jourdain Wright looking like a brick you-know-what house out in the backyard. I mean, Jourdain looking great on the scale, coming in for the catch weight of 190 and weighs in successfully. Marc-Andre Barriault, 1.5 pounds under that, taking this fight on short notice. Because if you look at it originally, this was supposed to be Jourdain Wright and Roman Kopylov. Loser goes home, and now it's Marc-Andre Barriault on short notice. They probably give a dog a bone, and they let him fight on. But if you look at it for Barriault, not that long ago, taking on Chitty Bang Bang and Joe Kwani, getting finished in that fight. And when it comes to the style of this one, Jourdain Wright, if he blitzes, can win this fight. Marc-Andre Barriault, when you blitz him, it's like he just kind of freezes. And then he's stuck there. It's like Han Solo up against the back. Like he's just frozen there, and you can hit him. And for Jourdain Wright, when you pressure him, he throws a little bit more, but he can freeze with his head way up. And the trouble for me when I broke down this fight is that Barriault's normally always coming forward unless he gets finished. And he likes to engage in the old clinch, likes to bug you up against the fence. And when that happens, Jourdain Wright goes bobbing for apples and leaves his head out there. So for me, I like Barriault, but again, One
I
of
thought
these
you had
guys
Jourdain
is
Wright
gonna
at the
win.
start of the week.
No, I had Barriault.
Oh, no, I thought we were split. You had Wright, I had Barriault.
No.
Oh, okay, I'm wrong. I do have Marc-Andre Barriault in this fight.
Switching the pick then.
Are you sure? I could have
Yeah, you
swore
had
I had
Jourdain
Power
Wright.
Bar. I still like Power Bar in this fight. Here's the thing. Both guys have been knocked out recently, and that's the big kind of X factor about this fight. I was caught up a lot on Power Bar. Oh, he just got knocked out by Joe Kawani. Bruno Silva knocked out Jourdain Wright only a month before that. So these are two guys coming off fairly significant knockout losses and having very quick turnarounds as a result. And I do agree 100% with the breakdown of the fight. Like, neither guy's going to do anything that you don't really see coming. And the story of this fight really is going to come down to whoever's moving forward should have the most success. Either Barriault with his wrestling and with his clinch control, or Jourdain Wright with his consistent flurries. But that's the weird thing about Wright. Sometimes he has really smart flurries where he's into the pocket, hits you a couple times and gets out. And sometimes he does just sort of have that like deer in the headlights type movement where it's like, do I really want to be hit right now? And that's always been really interesting to me because he tends to have more firepower than anybody who is in front of him. But it's almost like he has a lack of confidence in his own punching ability because in these 50-50 exchanges, you would think, hey, Jourdain Wright's going to be the one with more power in a lot of them. But I don't think that's going to be the case whatsoever. I really do think that Barriault is going to be able to get onto the inside and just wear on him as this fight goes on. So I guess I will switch my pick, and I do think Barriault, mainly because of his cardio. But again, this is one of those fights where if he's moving forward, gets his head in like a weird clinch position, a la Travis Brown and everybody who's ever failed to take him down, then we could see a knockout win for Jourdain Wright.
And I mean, it's tough. Like, I see the comment there from Nate Millar saying, I think Wright is better technically. We'll see if he sharpened up his bobbing for apples. Oh, that's a great one. Great recall. But when it does come to this one, and I see Voodoo Wiz saying no, Craig was talking about Wright in the beginning. Voodoo Wiz, you know me well enough by now. I like to bring up points for both guys, and sometimes I just talk about one fighter, and at the end I pick another, and people go, what? What just happened? But when it comes to Jourdain Wright, when we just look at the technical stand-up abilities, the guy's light on his feet. He moves quite a bit, but it's not necessarily wasted movement. Doesn't move backwards all that well, which is something that kind of scares you.
Because, well, it's not that he doesn't do it well. It's just that's his only move. Like, if you move backwards, people can keep on coming after you. You have to move at an angle. It's like defending a takedown. Nothing grinds my gears worse than when someone successfully digs their underhooks. The hardest part of the whole thing, they just get pushed right back into the cage and they keep on wrestling from that point. You have to dig your underhooks, angle off, and then get out to the middle of the cage. It's not like a baseball field where, like, everything's set and you only have to worry about one spot. You have to be aware of where the cage is around you at all times, and that's the easiest thing you have to do, defensively, either with your wrestling or with your striking. You can move back, but you have to go off to an angle at a certain point. Jourdain Wright, there's no angle to go off to. It's just going back.
So Eric Cote is saying Canadians rally behind Barriault. He's our one of two Canadians that are on this card, both representing Quebec. You got the West in Gatineau represented here. You have the somewhat West represented with Charles Jourdain. And then next weekend, Johan Lainez.
I was about to say, I feel like we've been talking a lot about Canadians in the UFC
Just
lately.
Quebecers.
Which is nice, though, because there was a time where it just felt like we never talked about anyone from Canada on this channel, so it's nice that it feels like every single time we do a prediction show for the weekend, there's always at least one Canadian fighter on there, which is nice to see that the sport continues to grow in this country, even though GSP's not in every commercial nowadays like he was 10 years ago.
And he's got a new documentary that I just saw on YouTube that came out in the last couple of days. 57% of the fans going with Jourdain Wright, well, now it's 58%. To 42% going Marc-Andre Barriault. The odds for this fight, this short notice pairing at 190 pounds. Marc-Andre Barriault, wow. Open at par, minus 194 favorite right now. Jourdain Wright, plus 163. I've seen a lot of people taking Jourdain Wright in the comments section, and I saw Clint take him as well. So Clint's on the underdogs. Nothing new.
I was going to say,
Lando
is the sky blue?
Vannata taking on Charles Jourdain, our next Canadian. And Matt, Lando Vannata looking drawn out, but rehydrates, won his last fight against Mike Grundy, which was a weird one. A really, really weird one. So I'm eager to see what we get out of this one. Let us know in the comments section who you have. It's heating up. We got about 400 tuning in right now with only 89 likes. It takes 2 seconds. It's free, and it means a lot to us, and it helps the channel out. So when we look at this one, Matt, D-Rod saying we always talk about Canadians, Canadian bacon. What else do we have? Voodoo Wiz saying I've got Barriault and Jourdain. And Joe saying that this is the main event. I said this is the main event, the co-main event. It should be on the poster. None of those things happened, but we're still here. So what are you saying?
This is an incredible fight, and it's weird because if you think about what you want Lando Vannata to be, Charles Jourdain should destroy him. Like, I really do think if this is just a striking battle between these guys, the style of striking that Jourdain has isn't a great matchup for Lando Vannata because Vannata likes to set set, and then throw a big strike. Or set, hit you with the hands, then end his combination with his kicks. When you're fighting a guy like Jourdain, who is still rangy for this weight class, and I know Vannata's a natural lightweight fighting at featherweight, I still think Jourdain is going to be the rangier guy in this fight, mainly because of how he fights. He ducks into a lot of his strikes, and he ducks away from a lot of his kicks, which just sort of makes him a bigger fighter than he already is. It's like Robert Williams on the defensive end. Like, Robert Williams stands next to Jason Tatum, and they look like very similar physically. It's just Robert Williams is the craziest athlete you've ever seen, so he makes himself look a lot bigger when he's just sort of out in open space. Jourdain, to me, is kind of like that, where you look at him, he's sort of a thin guy, but he's extremely explosive, and he has long-range power, so it almost makes him bigger frame-wise than he already is. But, and this is where I'm going to go back to Vannata not fighting like the guy we always assumed he would, he wrestles a lot more now, and if Charles Jourdain has any Achilles heel in his game, it is the wrestling defense. But the way I'm still looking at this fight is, I do worry about Vannata's cardio as it does go late, especially against a guy like Jourdain who has such a high output. So I do think this fight's going to be amazing. We don't put this as a fight of the night screen because we think one guy's going to completely mop the other one, but I do think Jourdain is going to win in one of those fight of the night style fights.
The thing that scares me, again, everybody knows it. Clay talked about it a little bit. Craig Hart saying Jourdain is by far the best value on the card. Again, Lando Vannata's base is wrestling. He got kind of wild with his striking, and it worked out for him. I mean, he won 4 performance bonuses in his first 4 UFC fights, and he went 3-1 in those fights. The thing that's scary, though, is he's kind of cleaned everything up. Technique-wise, he's a little bit more reserved. Wrestling-wise, he's a little more willing to engage in some of those exchanges. And Charles Jourdain, you don't need me to tell you this. He's 3-1 in the UFC, and his takedown defense is porous at best. So, again, if Charles Jourdain can get into a fight, kind of like he did against Julian Erosa before it ended, he's got a great opportunity in this one against Lando Vannata. Vannata's not a submission threat like Mr. Front Choke Erosa is. And listen, Julian Erosa is a tricky guy, and when his chin's there, who knows?
He's basically Damon Jackson when his chin is there.
He could go on a title run one day. 3rd time's the charm for old Julian Erosa. So the odds for this one, Groovy Lando, slight underdog, coming in at -102. Charles Jourdain, -118. I don't say it with the most confidence that I do have Charles Jourdain, but again, love that southpaw look. He switches into orthodox. He can box you up a little bit. You see less of a kick from the orthodox stance, but when he's southpaw, he can rip that left kick to the body, whip it to the legs. Lots of things that you like out of his striking, but I do, again, I love this fight. It should be a great one.
And here's the thing. Lando Vannata is a striker who knows how to wrestle, not a wrestler who knows how to strike. His natural tendency is always going to be to strike with guys, even though he does have a very, very short college background in wrestling. That's the thing about Vannata. He's not somebody who went 4 years to college and is a 4-time All-American.
One semester.
And that's why I do feel like we have to bring that up. Like, he's the better wrestler, but Lando Vannata is not some pure wrestler by any means. Again, he is a striker who knows how to wrestle, not a wrestler who knows how to strike. So I do think he's going to end up striking with Vannata, or with Jourdain, especially early on in this matchup, and I don't think it's going to end well.
Vannata defended 17 Mike Grundy takedowns, only allowed 3 on the 20, and landed 1 of his own. So interesting there. Listen, when it comes to question mark kicks on Saturday, what I usually do with these graphics to the left of us, I usually put down the new updated weigh-ins, and I don't change the pictures, because pictures don't change very often. I changed the picture for Alexander Romanov because he's A, bodied up, B, I would have liked to seen that fight against Ilir Latifi a little bit a while ago, but yeah, he's been competing in grappling competitions, just won one, looks amazing.
Craig, he looks great.
Yeah.
Amazing. I can't describe how good he looked on the scales yesterday.
No, he's a 265er, and he weighed in at, 240? So 240.5?
And it wasn't one of those cases where he lost the wrong kind of weight and he has a lot of, extra skin or anything. Alexander Romanov just got into the lab, I guess, and was like, hey, we're getting into the best physical shape as possible. He was already, one of the scariest heavyweight prospects out there. I am curious to see what version we're going to get of him today.
Honest to goodness, I've never seen somebody this big as a favorite since Valentina Shevchenko against Lauren Murphy, but -1693 the average for Alexander Romanov, not touching it with a 10-foot pole. Chase Sherman +913. You've got Bufo on the beat saying Sherman by DQ. I'm telling y'all, listen, we had 2 opportunities at a DQ last weekend, so maybe it happens this weekend. Voodoo Wid saying just skip this one. I don't know if it's this one or the last one. And Voodoo is saying, before they touch gloves, Sherman announces retirement. The super chat from Kyle O.M., who's always loyal over there, saying, happy Saturday, fellas. Kyle O.M.
I hope you're having a great Saturday.
Big Saturday for the sports. Again, I watch fan-controlled fantasy football today. But in this one, yeah, I mean, Chase Sherman's lost 3 in a row, and he got submitted in the first round of his last fight again in a co-main event against Jake Collier. Next weekend's co-main event, Jake Collier, Andre Arlovsky.
You mean Jake Collier who fought at middleweight?
Yeah, that guy.
Okay, that's kind of my big point about this. In every other sport, you have to be in the best shape possible to play it, because everyone's so good.
Jake Collier, non-grappler.
This is my big point. In the NBA, guys like Luka Doncic and Nikola Jokic, they're really good when they show up because their skills are so good. Then it takes them a couple years to figure out, hey, this is a job even though I do it as a sport. So I have to be in shape all year around, and I'm going to be that much better when it's time to do my sport. Nikola Jokic went from being very good to being an MVP caliber player when he got in shape. Every other MMA fighter has to do this. We have weight classes for a reason. And the one good thing about weight classes in MMA is it makes you be in as good a possible shape as you can possibly be before you fight. Because if you miss weight and if you do anything wrong in your camp, you're going to lose a massive percentage of your check, which no other sport has to deal with. Heavyweight fighters don't have that problem, though. You can weigh in at whatever you want to. There is a massive range that they allow you to fight under. And that's why you have guys like William Knight who can fight at 205 and also weigh 251. Alexander Romanov, to me, is like a Nikola Jokic who, like, got his stuff together and went on a diet. Like, he was already very, very good when we just saw how big he was, where he used his physical mass and less just his skills. If we see him rely more on his skills and less just on, hey, I'm really big at the heavyweight division, I think we could see sort of the next evolution out of Romanov. And maybe this is the guy who we think can actually get into the rankings and cause a lot of damage up there.
Lost the fight against Juan Espino, but it's a win. Technical majority decision.
Then he didn't lose.
Technical split decision. Falling off a cliff with cardio as that one went on against the older Senegalese wrestling champ at the Canary Islands, my guy Juan Espino. I miss him so. But when it comes to this fight, yeah, Chase Sherman asked for the release so he could get some fights in to make more money, maybe go the BKFC route. I paraphrased from the Cole Shelton article on bjpen.com. But when it comes to this one, they bring him back in on a 3-fight losing streak. He struggled to keep pace with some of the guys that he's been taking on. He had that nice win against Villanueva where he had great leg kicks. His boxing was on point. But in a fight like this, I don't see him having those advantages unless Romanov walks into a thunderous shot and gets dropped. But even then, Romanov with the jiu-jitsu. So
and Sherman's not really a one-punch guy either. He has good power, don't get me wrong, but he will use his combinations more to knock guys out.
Stephen C. saying, they don't read these comments. No, I don't know. I mean, we do, but... Clay saying Michael Chandler would be loving Matt's pro-exercise stance here. If we look at Fight Night picks, 96% of the fans going Romanov. So if things get crazy, I mean, Air Dog Ryback saying Big Raps dub, and Pulse Reload saying Chase got KO'd by Justin Willis. Big pretty go home.
People forget Justin Willis was like really good for a 6-month stretch and then just left
and then had that terrible fight against Mark Hunt and then
but no, he wasn't. He won a fight against a ranked guy that he needed to win, and then he left. I don't even think that was a terrible fight. He beat the brakes off Mark Hunt.
Yeah, it was just, fans booed, and he fought very technically, and then got himself released. So, Matt, the next fight, Macy Barber, Montana De La Rosa. The fan vote on this one, 72% Barber to 28% MDLR. When you look at this one, De La Rosa only has lost to good competition in the UFC, but has only beat the poor level of competition in the UFC. Macy Barber, buzzsaw, and then her last couple of fights, Roxanne Modafferi, ACL injury, comes back, fights Miranda Maverick, beats Miranda Maverick, but does she? Not really. And then has that fight against Alexa Grasso, where Grasso looked very, very good, and Barber was somewhat competitive, but not really. So when it comes to this one, I think Barber has an advantage in everything but submission abilities, so we'll see how this one plays out.
This is a weird fight because these fighters are two sides of the exact same coin, where Montana De La Rosa, a wrestler who can strike a little bit, that really hurt my head, or Macy Barber, a really good power puncher who can wrestle when she really needs to get it done. We've just seen Macy in these fights before, like defend a few takedowns early on, you're a better striker than your opponent is, and as long as your cardio doesn't fall off a cliff and, later on second round, third round, you can probably pick up a decision if you don't knock her out outright. And this is what I go back to. I don't think we, as MMA fans, respect JJ Aldrich enough. I know that's a weird thing to say, but it's the truth. Like, Aldrich isn't some scrub who's in the UFC for 9 fights at this point. She is a solid fighter at this division, and Macy Barber knocked her out very quick and beat her with a lot of her flurries. So, Montana De La Rosa, to me, is like JJ Aldrich with a better PR team around her. She might be higher in the rankings, but skill-wise, they do a lot of the same stuff, even though Aldrich is a little bit more boxing-heavy, whereas Montana De La Rosa relies on her wrestling. But I think Barber can use a similar game plan to go out there and beat someone like Montana. Montana, in her fight against Andrea Lee, got lit up on the feet and didn't show much in the striking in that matchup. And that's the fight I always go back to, because it's one thing to get beat up on your feet when you're not having any success with your wrestling. It's another thing to have no success for 15 minutes, and I really didn't feel like De La Rosa was doing that much in that fight. So I do like Barber to get back to her winning ways.
When it comes to De La Rosa, a few takedowns, which took on Ariane Lipski, and if you really look at that fight, she dominated. 6 minutes, 52 seconds of control time, finished it in the second round. Was able to get takedowns against Maeda Bueno Silva. That one is a draw on her record. Maeda Bueno Silva. Tricky run in the UFC. She fought Viviane Araujo, took her down, lost the decision. Mara Romero Barella. It just is a weird one. So you do have Voodoo Wiz, who hit up the Super Chat. Thanks for the good content y'all provide every week. Who do y'all think is the best ref in the UFC? Typically Jason Herzog.
I was just about to say Jason
Typically.
Herzog.
I like Mark Goddard as well. Bufo saying Fight Night Picks, y'all did research, win-loss stats on fighters. I don't know about that one, Bufo. But when it comes to this one, I'm going with Barber. But again, Clay brings up a great point. Hopefully Barber doesn't have a cold start, because when she went on that run, it was a lot of fast starts. So it's
I feel
just
like she bought into her own hype, to be honest. And I would like to see her get back to her early ways, because every time Macy Barber talked, it was, hey, I don't care about my opponent right now. I'm going to fight Valentina and try to become the new John Jones and be the youngest champ ever. I do feel like now she doesn't feel as full of herself. Maybe that means nothing. I'm going to completely say that right now. But hopefully she does just have a more realistic expectations of where her own skill set is, because I think that's a really important thing to have in MMA.
It's just like Tottenham last weekend against Brighton Hove Albion, when they came out to a terrible start against an awful team, and then they got scored on late to lose 1-0. And then this weekend against Brentford, who is nobody. Brentford's nothing. And they came out super flat to start, poured it on at the end, and couldn't score. It was a draw. So Macy Barber's the same way. Great team, usually scores a lot against poor teams. Macy Barber, fast starts, and then lately, not fast starts.
So she's Bradley Beal, to put into NBA terms. Can put up big stats in a bad team.
That's the way she goes. So in this fight, Matt, Clay Guida, Claudio Puelles, the knee bar king. He's got two of them in the UFC. One against Gritzmacher and one against Felipe Silva in a fight where he was losing. And a lot of referees would have brought the doctor in to look at that eyeball, but they didn't. And Puelles pulls off the come from behind win by knee bar in that one. They're pairing him up against Clay Guida. So it's prospect versus gatekeeper to the prospects. And for Guida, good takedown defense, volume heavy. That's pretty much Clay Guida at this stage of his career. Puelles, not much of a striker, but I anticipate training at Sanford MMA and not so much in Peru anymore will accentuate some of those skills, and hopefully he's able to gain on that. But when I look at this fight, Matt, yeah, it is a really, really tricky one for both guys.
Remember when Vitor Belfort was in his early to mid-30s, and he had all the knowledge of someone who's been fighting in MMA for his whole entire life? But normally athletes around this time start to slow down a little bit. But Vitor, before USADA was implemented, was able to go on some vitamins that you can't do anymore, and he looked amazing. So he had the physicality of someone in their early 20s, but the mind of someone who's been through this a lot. Clay Guida's like that, but without of all those great supplements. Like, skill-wise, Clay Guida's still pretty good at everything. He's not a bad striker, he's not a bad wrestler, not a bad grappler. He is very well-rounded with his MMA game. He just doesn't have the level of explosion that you would like behind his punches, or behind his takedown attempts, or even behind some of his get-outs throughout his fights. But that's the thing about Guida. I can't really point to anything he does in the cage and think, wow, that's a big negative, which has been able to carry him very late into his career. Like, Matt Brown, he might have really fun fights, but he's getting stopped in a lot of these fights, and he's not looking very good in some of them. Clay Guida's never getting, destroyed. He'll have a competitive fight with you. Charles Oliveira beat the brakes off him, but that guy's champion right now. So for Guida, he's one of the rare fighters who's this late into his career, but I still love watching. I always get excited for Clay Guida fights, because still, he fights in a similar manner he did when he was younger. I just don't know if he's going to have the explosion to get it from under Claudio Puelles if he does find himself in that position.
What do you make out of the haircut?
I don't like it. I'm a big fan of long hair Clay Guida. I grew up like him and Benson Henderson, where it was like, oh, we only see hair. We don't really see their head.
Benson still does that.
I like how Benson ties it for 30 seconds, then anything happens and his hair's just out like crazy again. I'm a fan of long hair Clay Guida. I don't know about you.
Alejandro saying Guida's durable. He's got cardio. He can wrestle and knows how knows his win condition, scary to bet against him.
That's a really good point to bring up, too, and that's why I said he knows what he's good at. Sarah McMahon, what's the first thing we talk about every time we talk about her? Offensively, how good is her grappling? Defensively, how poor is her grappling? It's almost like she gets into some positions where it's like, okay, you're not great here, why are we going there? With Clay Guida, I don't ever feel like he's going to have that kind of a gap in concentration.
So, Poyez open minus 175, Guida open plus 150. The odds are par right now, so people are betting on Clay Guida. And I have Clay Guida in this fight because for Poyez, he's got one takedown. It's a high crotch single leg. Again, he's the taller guy. Voodoo mentioned that. So taking on the shorter fighter who has good takedown defense, who normally has quite a good base. And usually, again, you brought it up, explosivity when it comes to a guy who's 40 at this weight class. Those things don't normally go hand in hand. I think 155 for Clay Guida. Not as bad as 145 for Clay Guida.
He got a lot of weight to get down there.
But when you look at this fight, I mean, for me, yeah, I still have Clay Guida in this one. For some reason, this one didn't pop up in the Instagram stories, so chances are in like 3 hours, it'll like magically find its way there. Because that's how Instagram stories work when you post a bunch of things at the same time. But when I do look at this one, Derek hitting up the super chat, always great job. Craig and Matt, even the weak cards pay off with your analysis and information. Much love from H-Town. Derek, the only story I have from H-Town, because I've been to the airport twice, is that I ate Jack in the Box one time out of those two, and I thought it tasted like Wendy's. And I was whelmed, I guess. I was just whelmed.
Hopefully you're a big Jalen Green guy. I think he's going to be super good in the future.
So there's that. But again, I know we're split on this pick, but...
And I don't feel good about the Claudio Poyez pick either, because again, all of his strengths are sort of what Clay Guida does really well. I'm just kind of relying on the fact that Guida won't be able to use that big burst if he does end up underneath Claudio Poyez. I think on the feet, they will be a little bit more 50-50 than people expect, just because I don't know if Clay Guida can go out there and dominate a fight with his stand-up. He can win a fight with his stand-up for 15 minutes. I just think he will have to mix in some form of grappling at a point throughout this fight, and that's going to be a prime time for Poyez to get a trip, get one of those weird takedowns that he can, and if he does end up on top of Clay Guida, that's the last place Clay would like to be.
Yeah, and listen, I've been high on Poyez in the two fights in the comeback. The Jourdain Wright fight, I had him there. I had him against Chris Gritzmacher. I love his skills, but this is one of those ones where I just kind of scratch my head a little bit. And the level of competition that Poyez has taken on in the UFC, not all that great, but it's 40-year-old Clay Guida, so I can definitely get behind somebody picking him, just not myself.
It should be a fun fight.
It should be a fun fight. In the main event, Amanda Lemos taking on Jessica Andrade. Now, my favorite fight of the weekend is, it's at 135. It's Ralphion Stotts. It's Juan Archuleta. But I like this one, too. It's Amanda Lemos taking on Jessica Andrade. Andrade back down to strawweight. Didn't necessarily love how she looked on the scales.
She looked like she always did.
Didn't look amazing, but yeah, I mean, Scoob's hanging out in the chat. Clay saying not confident at all, ended up on Guida. If he doesn't get subbed, somehow Leonardo Santos didn't finish him, but he didn't, so he got many, many things. So in this one, you have Lemos wins, you have, this is a really tough fight. Jessica Andrade, she's only lost to top fighters. Amanda Lemos hasn't really fought those top fighters. Leslie Smith at 135 was an amazing fight. If you didn't go back and watch it, you still have some time, but it's a great one. But then since then, knocking fools dead, fights Angela Hill, front kick up the middle. Did Steven Seagal teach her that? I don't know.
It's a dangerous technique.
Did you watch the Steven Seagal video with Jesse Enkamp? Great YouTube channel about karate, and his brother Oliver is in some of those videos.
I like Oliver.
I love Jesse Enkamp's YouTube video. YouTube channel. I can't get enough of it. And then when I saw that in the last week or two, he had a video where he went to Dubai and spent a day with Steven Seagal. It was amazing.
I couldn't think of anything I'd want to do less.
Oh, it was awesome. No, I'm dead serious. I'm not joking when I say this. It was great.
Talking, that's all.
But when it comes to Amanda Lemos, great front kick, knocks down Angela Hill, wins that first round convincingly, doesn't win round 2, doesn't win round 3, yet wins the decision. So a big opportunity for her to right the wrong and get a win. And if she beats Andrade, excuse me, you're ranked 10th in this division. You're beating the number 1 ranked flyweight. You wouldn't think that does much.
You're fighting Marina Rodriguez next.
Yeah, you're fighting somebody super high ranked after that.
Probably Marina. This is the weird thing about this fight. Jessica Andrade is falling into a Roy Jones Jr. category where changing weight classes is great and all that, but when your body finally adjusts to a weight class, it probably doesn't want to start sucking extra moisture out of itself to then make another weight class. And I'm going to zag a little bit. I don't think Andrade looked awful on the scales, but I do think eventually it will catch up to her. It could be this fight. It could be the next fight. We don't really know because Andrade is one of these weird, like, money fight women's fighters. She can fight in any female weight class from 135 to 115. We know she can be a champion at 115. We know she's better than everybody who isn't the champion at 125. And at 135... let's be honest, she would struggle just because the size up there is a big issue for her. But at 125 and 115, few fighters can keep up with her punching power. Few fighters can take her down. And you know what's the worst thing? The absolute worst thing about Jessica Andrade, normally if you're fighting a power puncher who has these high amplitude takedowns, eventually they're going to gas out, right?
We haven't seen it yet.
Right? We haven't seen Jessica Andrade gas out yet. Now, she's slowed down at the end of fights. Go back to the Joanna and Jacek fight. She did slow down as that fight was going on. She also hit Joanna with some good shots in the 5th round of that fight. My point with Andrade is that if you're having success in the 1st round, you will have success in the 2nd round and the 3rd round because she is very predictable. The problem is, if you don't have success early against her, things are going to get better as the fight goes on. She's going to keep on going in with flurries of hooks. She's going to keep on going for that. I'd call it a high single leg, but it's like I'm going to lift you over my head John Cena style.
Kyle M hitting up the super chat saying, having my meniscus repaired in a few days. Can I get a good luck shout out? Thanks, fellas. Good luck, Kyle. And may you one day fight in the UFC like Tyson Pedro. Couple of meniscus injuries and he's back.
Exactly, Kyle. It's not the end of the world. A lot of athletes get meniscus injuries. By the sounds of it, you're a heck of an athlete yourself, so I wouldn't worry about it at all. You're going to do great.
You're going to do great.
The last thing about this fight, though, is that is the big X factor that I feel like people aren't talking about enough. You have a power puncher who is a really good grappler, too, but it's not like you could rely on Andrade to then fade in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th round. If anything, she does start to get stronger in those rounds, so I really worry about Lemos if she can't have success early, because if you gas against someone like Angela Hill, that's one thing. She can't really make you pay with one single shot like someone like Andrade can. If you get tired against Jessica Andrade, like if it's round 2 and we start seeing Lemos slow down, she's going to get lifted up over her head and slammed on the ground and probably get finished.
So the votes here on YouTube, 68% going with Andrade to get the win. The votes at Fight Night Picks very close, 66% going with Andrade. The odds in this fight favor Jessica Andrade to a minus 222 average. And if you look at Lemos plus 183. So the fans going Andrade, the money with Andrade. Paul Pierce saying Scotty Barnes. Eric Cote going Lemos will be the one fading. I saw Lemos fade in her last fight, which kind of scares me after a big first round, and that was a 3-rounder. So, I don't know. I mean, for me, Lemos has the power, great countering abilities too, and she's one of those fighters, we seem to talk about it once or twice every week, but we haven't done it a lot lately. Used to always be 2 black lines in the UFC. Now there's one smaller cage. And in the smaller cage, when you look at it, Lemos behind that black line, when she plants and throws those hooks...
If she's back there against Jessica Andrade, she's getting knocked out.
It's scary, but when you're back there against Andrade, if there's level feints from Andrade, she can come up high with those heavy shots, or she can try and work in some of those takedowns. So for me, I've got Jessica Andrade in this fight. Nothing changing for me as this week's gone on. Feels like a bit of a weird one, just like last weekend. Again, I had the confidence with Vicente Luque. I'm not afraid to say it. And look what happened. I had the confidence with Andrade at the start of this week. I still do. Lemos could get the win. But again, I still do have Andrade here.
So do I. Again, this is my favorite kind of fight, though. You have the established elite fighter versus the prospect with a lot of hype. So this should be a lot of fun.
Blue hair don't care. Jessica Andrade this week. Matt, as we always do with Fight Night Picks question mark kicks, we stack the deck once more. We go through all of the picks and predictions. Voodoo Wiz about to watch the Fury scrap. That should be a fun one, but maybe not with a 1-year-old. That might be difficult. If they get loud, just keep your eyes glued on both. Macho Man hanging out. Yeah, the point deductions. Well, there were a lot of them last week. They were very, very weird. Adnan, I don't have a QMK parlay this week, so there's that. And I saw Star Smith, 77 Porter. This is going to be an awesome fight, 100%. And hopefully you're having a good week. So, Matt, Dean Barry taking on Mike Jackson, going with Dean Barry in this one.
So am I. Might be the last time I ever pick him.
Either guy, really.
Yeah, let's be honest.
Marcin Prachnio, Philipe Lins. Feels like a trap card. Philipe Lins looked great yesterday. Still have Prachnio with a volume, but he's susceptible to getting knocked out. And Lins knocks guys out.
Wouldn't it be a lot more fun if we had like one championship Prachnio versus PFL Philipe Lins? Like they could have co-promoted that. Then that would have been on the fight of the night screen. I do a Prachnio mainly for his ability to land some damaging shots at range, but should be a fun fight.
I wish I could get this right. Somebody in the chat, will you talk about how much MMA, like PFL, 2 Bellator cards, UFC, Fury White, One championship. Did you see the Muay Thai fight where Buddy got
Liam
knocked
Harrison.
down
No,
twice?
not Buddy. Liam Harrison, my favorite Muay Thai fighter, who never wins every time I try to watch him fight. And then I finally decided, perfect, I'm gonna watch a one championship fight.
Oh my
never do
God.
this. Gets dropped with a question mark kick. Gets up immediately. Gets dropped with a left hook. Turns around. Drops his opponent 3 times in a row. Bam, bam, bam. The craziest. It was like Czech Congo versus Pat Barry, but in one championship Muay Thai with MMA gloves on.
It was insanity. So
Liam Harrison's the man, though.
that and the friggin' I was gonna say Clay Guida, but the Clay Collar fight against Jeremy Stevens, insanity for MMA. Preston Parsons taking on Evan Elder, both going with Preston Parsons in this one.
Should be an interesting fight. I don't think he's gonna get submitted.
Aoriqileng taking on Cameron Else, split on the pick. I've got Else, you've got Aoriqileng, but we can definitely see the methods for each man.
Should be a really fun fight between these two.
Should be a good one. Tyson Pedro, Ike Villanueva, scares you with the injuries and the layoff for Pedro, but both going Pedro.
And we can both agree, like, this is kind of a perfect comeback fight for Tyson Pedro. You have an Ike Villanueva who...
1-4 fighter.
But we know exactly what we're going to get out of Ike Villanueva. He's not someone near the start of his career who's going to add something new that we don't expect. Like, he's going to walk forward. He's going to be a bit of a bruiser. And if Tyson Pedro is at all the guy who he was pre-injury, he should be able to win this fight.
Eric Cote saying Horiguchi's going to get that win over Patchy Mix. Pretty sure Patchy's like a decent underdog in that one, too.
Horiguchi was beating the brakes off Sergio, though, until he ate that spinning back fist.
Dwight Grant taking on Sergey Khandozhko, both going with Sergey. Honda to get the win. The old Honda Big Red.
A car you can trust.
That's not a car. Honda Big Red's a 3-wheeler.
I just mean Honda. Honda's a brand you can trust. Unlike Dwight Grant and his output, which I can never trust.
Big power, though. Jourdain Wright taking on Marc-Andre Barriault. Matt switching the pick in this one.
I do have power bar in this. I do think it's just going to come down to cardio. When these guys both get their work done in very similar positions, the difference is Wright's going to be trying to strike and Barriault's going to be trying to get him down to the ground. And I don't even think Marc-Andre has to get every single takedown he goes for. Just keep it in the back of Jourdain Wright's mind so he's not all that happy to just stand in the middle and exchange with you. I think it should be a good fight, but I do have power bar.
All right, our next one, we have Vannata taking on Jourdain, both going avec le Canadien, Monsieur Charles Jourdain.
Should be an amazing fight, though.
Oui, monsieur. All right, our next one, Romanov taking on the short notice replacement, recently released. It's Chase Sherman going with Alexander Romanov.
I thought thicker than a bowl of oatmeal Romanov was going to win. Now he's thin and he's like in really good shape. So I'm not, of course, I think he's going to win, but I'm really curious to see if we see like a different version of him at all. If he will fight any differently, just because physically he does look a lot different. And when you do take 20 pounds off your body, I'm assuming you're not as strong, but your cardio might be a little bit better. It'll just be interesting to see what changes he's made to his overall MMA game and not just his body.
He has been doing nothing but grappling tournaments outside of the MMA cage.
No, I know. If he could show up and he has like a kick to the body or something, it's like, wow, Romanov, we're off to the races.
Macy Barber taking on MDLR, going with Barber.
Could be a close fight. Again, one's going to go for a lot of takedowns. One's going to try to punish her with her punching power. But I do think Barber can at least get damage done on the feet, whereas Montana De La Rosa is either going to be win by submission or hopefully get enough rounds on the ground that way. So I do like Barber, but it should be a fun fight.
Clay Guida taking on Claudio Puelles. I've got Clay Guida.
I've got Claudio, but I think this should be a fun fight.
It should be a good one. And in the main event, you have Lemos, you have Andrade. It should be fun. It should be one that you can look forward to.
I guess this will be my question for you, since we both have the same fighter in the main event. If Andrade wins this fight, do you think she stays at 115 or goes back up to 125? Because it's weird, at 125 she's beaten the 2 #1 contenders, but at 115 she was the former champ, so I don't really know what she does next.
I think they're probably going to do 115 pounds. Just if you get that win, you beat a 10, but you're still #1, so you slot somewhere in the top 5, and then you fight Mackenzie Dern, who's on a roll. Dern.
I would do Rodriguez, but I think Dern's still a good matchup, yeah.
Yeah, it's really one of those weird ones. So both of us on Andrade here. Couple of picks that are different. The co-main event, the Aoriqileng fight where he's taking on Cameron Else. Those are the two. And yeah, I mean, again, everybody's mentioned it in the comment section. Tyson White, Bellator. There's so much going on tonight. There's baseball, there's hockey, there's NBA.
Did the Raptors win, by the way?
It's the busiest time to be a sports fan. So we got a lot to focus on. And listen, I'll throw it on over there. I mean, look at that. You've got Rob Font taking on Tito Marlon Vera. And that one's going to come out in the not-so-distant future. Next weekend, that's that fight. So it should be a lot of fun that way. And hopefully you folks can check that one out. Because I know that card, not all that hot and heavy. But there's some more fights you can look forward to in that main event I love.
And I think the main event is kind of similar to this weekend's main event. You have the more established Rob Font. He's been around the top of the division, maybe not for years now, but I think we can all realize just how talented of a fighter he is. Came up short against one of the greatest fighters we've ever seen in the cage, against Jose Aldo.
Best featherweight of all time.
Exactly. And a great fight between those two guys. And I think this fight against Marlon Vera is a good one. People kind of forget, Vera had a lot of hype in his first kind of run. Lost to John Lineker, lost to Tiny Vitor, your guy, and then kind of built himself up again, has the win over Sean O'Malley, lose to Song Yadong. So I feel like for Marlon Vera, we all know how good he is, but he's trying to get into that great category. And with a win over Rob Font, that definitely puts you in that great category. So I'm super excited for the main event.
Poor Frankie Edgar on a poster. It's not going away, but a big time card, and hopefully you guys enjoy it. I know people are excited about that thumbnail. And if you're excited about that, you'll enjoy the entire darn thing. So we'll throw it back over there. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. If you didn't toss a like on the way out, you can do that. And sub so you know when we drop that video next. But again, a big card, and the next pay-per-view is a big one too. Just keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. And as we always say, let's get into it.
Place